This morning's scriptures come from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 20 through 23. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind in which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. Our second scripture comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 4, verses 18 through 22. As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left their boats and their father and followed him. The word of the Lord.
Well, good morning again. Recently, I actually posted a picture. Actually, it was, I think, on Monday. I posted a picture on my Facebook, and I think we have it here. We'd run into a little bit of a problem in our house last weekend. We had done some laundry, and it was clear that it had finished the cycle, but the water wasn't actually draining out of the washing machine. And we've actually had this problem before, a few years ago before we moved here, and knew that last time the fix was you had to replace a pump, because obviously there's a pump in there that pumps the water out, as you would expect. We're like, okay, well, we kind of know what this is, and I know right away that it is beyond my level of very mediocre skill to even fix or even pretend to fix. So we called somebody up who had a good recommendation online. A shout out to Ed at Hometown Appliance Repair. Not a paid endorsement, just he just did a really good job. But Ed was there. I called Monday morning. Ed was there Monday afternoon, and sure enough, took a look at it and diagnosed, like, yep, your pump isn't working. And I'm like, I know, we've been here before. He's like, well, I always keep a few of these around. So he went out to his truck and he came back and spent about 45 minutes trading out the pump and the thing, doing the thing that I knew I couldn't do. And I mentioned to him during that time that, we've had this happen before, and we were told last time that this pump is kind of a particular weak spot in the design of the dryer last time, or the washer last time. Ed then decides to inform me that, well, that's not really true. The pump is fine. The problem is there's this filter, and if you look at the bottom corner of the dryer in or washer in the picture, there's a little door there. Behind that door, turns out, is a filter, and if you don't clean that regularly, the pump has to work too hard, and then it will basically burn itself out, which is what happened. Well, it turns out regularly is more than every 5 years, which is basically what we had been doing, unknown to us. And at one moment I was like really grateful to have this piece of information that I'm like, oh, okay, so there's something we can actually do about this. And also a little annoyed that the last person didn't tell me that. But I guess that is what it is. And so I wrote a little date on there, so I knew the last time it was clean, so we could keep track of it. And then I'm like, I bet you I'm not the only one who doesn't know that exists. Now, I'm sure if you're the kind of person that actually reads owner's manuals or something in the owner's manual that tells you to do that, you now know what kind of person I am. And so, frankly, my own fault, right? But I'm like, somebody else needs to know this. So I took this picture and I posted it to Facebook. And I'm like, just learned an expensive lesson. In case you don't know, and you have a washer like this, there's a filter back there. And this elicited quite a number of comments. And I would say the comments were about 50-50. There was the group that was very nicely trying to say, yeah, you didn't know that was there? And I'm like, no, I didn't know that was there. And then the other half who were like, oh my God, I'm going to go check my washing machine right now. I didn't know that was there, right? And I'm sure for many of you out there, like, half of you are out there sitting home mildly smugly going, well, I clean mine out every 3 months. And the other half of you after worship are going to go check your washing machines. Either way, you're welcome. It's nice to feel smug once in a while. I understand that. You're good. And if I save you a repair bill, I'm sorry, Ed, if I cost you a little bit of work, but, good for you guys too. But this is the nature of things, right? And of course, I didn't have to do that, right? I didn't have to share my shame with Facebook and be like, look, I'm a big idiot, but I learned something. You might want to know it too. But, and I recognize that, like, it's a small thing. It's a very small thing. Don't get me wrong. But there is this risk. I'm like, okay, I'm going to look a little foolish right now. But me looking a little foolish right now may actually help somebody else. So I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to take the hit for looking a little silly in hopes to give a little useful information out there in the world. This is a small example of what it is we're actually talking about today. We're talking about this idea that as people of faith, people followers of Christ, followers of Christ's way, we have a lot of privileges and benefits, but we also have some responsibilities. One of the responsibilities we have is to be the sharers of the good news. That is really the whole project that Jesus is about. Is making sure that people understand the good news, but not only that each person understands the good news, but that they don't keep it to themselves, that they choose to share it with others. Now, first I want to talk a little bit about the Genesis story. So Genesis story today we have, so last week, if you remember, we had the coming of all the plants, right? So we had the plants springing up out of the ground. So God is sort of relinquishing some of the direct control over creation. This is no longer God just doing all of the work, right? He's allowing the land itself to spring forth plants. And today we have the creations of the birds and the fish. But not only does he just create the birds and the fish and put them out there, he then gives them some responsibility. He says, go, therefore, and be fruitful and multiply. Now, if you read ahead, you know, or if you've read this story before, you know, that's not the last time God's going to say, go be fruitful and multiply. But the first time he says it is actually here. And he says it to the birds of the air and the fish in the sea. He says, okay, I'm putting you in place, but now you all need to go and continue to propagate. You need to continue to spread yourself. And what we have both here and in the creation, in the story of plants last week is we have the creation of basically a healthy system. Right? So God's not just creating a world, God wants to create a healthy world, right? And one of the hallmarks of a healthy world is one that grows. A healthy world is one that multiplies. A healthy world doesn't stay static, but continues to bring forth new life and new creation. And if you think about the time that the first people who would have encountered this story like 3,000 years ago, who have no understanding of the mechanics of like how like birth and pregnancy and all that stuff work. Like they have no understanding of DNA or anything like that. You have to imagine that even then, or especially then, the process of procreation, the process of animals bringing forth other little baby animals, seemed incredibly miraculous because they had no framework for understanding what was actually going on. Now, I would also argue that even today, even though we do, have medical science and we understand, a lot better about what's actually going on behind the scenes, it's still pretty miraculous, right? I mean, I remember the first time I held my children, I'm like, this is a pretty cool thing. Like this is a miracle that I got to witness, and I may know a little bit better, and my wife, who's a nurse, knows a heck of a lot better than I do. What was kind of going on behind the scenes as far as this child coming into the world. The fact that specific child came into the world, that it was not just any old person that came into existence, but it was Gavin and Vivian that came into existence with all their distinctiveness and uniqueness and all the blessings and gifts that they were given. Like the fact that happened, that is miraculous, and it's true for any one of us. The fact that we are here, that not somebody else is here, that God and the universe conspired that we would be born. And it doesn't matter if we kind of know the logistics of how that happened. The miracle that we even exist can't be denied. And so you see that in the scripture. You see this kind of reverence and awe for the fact that the world even works this way, that we're able to do that, and that we can, on the regular basis, witness these things. A couple of my friends on Facebook they're currently in lambing season, and so I feel like my Facebook feed is like full of pictures of baby lambs. They're so adorable, and I just want to cuddle them like you wouldn't believe. And it's miraculous. It doesn't matter that I know how that lamb was born. It was a miracle. So it is a miracle complete that we are here. It's a miracle that we have the ability to bring forth new life. And it's one of the signs that we live in a healthy world and that we are a healthy place, is that new life continues to come about. Now, Jesus is going to take this physical reality of this idea of multiplication and being fruitful and multiplying. He's going to take that physical reality and then use it in sort of this metaphorical way when he approaches his first disciples. So he approaches his first disciples, and these are the first words. The words we heard today are the first words that Jesus shares with any of his followers. And he approaches these first people, and he really interestingly approaches fishermen. Now, if you were in the first century with Jesus, you would be very surprised by this choice. We kind of, for most of us, fishing isn't a profession, it's a hobby, and even for those for whom fishing is a profession, we make reality TV shows out of them and things like that. And it's almost seen almost in this as this noble thing, and because I recognize the risks that are part of the process of going out there and doing things like commercial fishing. That was not so in Jesus' day. Fishermen were kind of looked down upon, and they were looked down upon for the same reason that tax collectors were. Because fishermen didn't have any choice but to be complicit with what Rome was doing. Because they had, much as the same today actually, Rome had this idea of things like fishing rights and fishing quotas and fishing licenses. That's not something we invented. So if you were a fisherman back then, it's because you purchased the right from the Romans to be fishermen, which means the Israelites living in their own land, fishing seas that they had fished forever, had to pay this foreign empire for the right to fish their own fish. So you can imagine how well that went over with folks. And you actually bought your fishing rights from the tax collectors. That was part of the things that the tax collectors did as well. So if Zebedee and Peter's family and all that kind of stuff are fishing in this way, it means that they have chosen to participate in that process. And there are no ends of people who would look down on them for doing so. So the fact that Jesus comes to them and says, he doesn't say, come and follow me, right? And I'm going to teach you all this cool stuff. Right? That's not what he says. He doesn't say, come and follow me and I'm going to teach you, to be a religious leader. He doesn't say that. He says, come and follow me and I will teach you to be fishers of men. So right there from the very beginning is the expectation of multiplication, is the expectation that whatever this thing that Jesus is doing isn't going to be constrained to a small group of people, that this thing that Jesus is doing is going to grow, and it's going to grow by design, and that idea that it's going to grow and be shared is baked in right from the very beginning in the first words that Jesus speaks to his disciples. It actually carries all the way through to the last words that Jesus will speak to his disciples in Matthew 28. So in Matthew 28, we get the famous, what we call the Great Commission. And in Matthew 28:18, we get Jesus' final words to the disciples. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all that I have taught you. And remember, I am with you till the end of the age. So from the very beginning is this expectation that what you're going to do is meant to be shared. And at the end, Jesus says, okay, now it's time to really put that into practice. It's time to share the good news that you have known. Now, for many, the idea that Jesus would use fishermen to do this work would look foolish. After all, who's going to listen to fishermen, right? They're fishermen, right? And there is a world, Jesus lives in a world where there are religious leaders. He will meet them. They're called Sadducees and Pharisees and lawyers, right? But there are religious leaders. So if Jesus wants somebody to go and lead, this movement of faith, this movement of the good news, why wouldn't he use the religious leaders that were already there? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Jesus isn't trying to start a movement of religious leaders. He's not trying to start that kind of thing. He's trying to start something. He's trying to start a movement for everybody, where everybody gets to play a role, where everybody has a part, where the good news is made real to everybody. And the truth is, we will all hear things differently and sometimes better from some people than we will hear things from others. We are much more likely to hear what is actually trying to be said from somebody who we know somehow shares our experiences, lives a life similar to us, and knows where we come from, right? I mean, that's who we listen to. The truth is, Jesus didn't listen. Jesus didn't go to the religious leaders, says the religious leader, much to my own chagrin, by the way. Jesus didn't go to the religious leaders because he knew most people weren't going to listen to them. I also know, on a regular basis, that I can say things, as many times as I need to say them, but sometimes when your friend says those things to you, oftentimes people listen a little bit better. So Jesus is worried about the movement. He's worried about what's going on. He really wants this thing that he is trying to build to succeed, and he wants it to multiply, and he wants it to grow. In order for that to happen, he's got to do the more foolish thing, go to the least likely people, knowing at the end of the day, they are the ones that are actually the most likely to be able to accomplish the task. For each of us, we all have a group. We all have people that it is easier for us to speak to, that we are more relevant to than others. That is just simply the way of things. Now, as many of you know, before I was here, one of my jobs was to help start new churches, and I really enjoyed that work. And one of the things that I learned very, very quickly, though, in that work is, of helping to start new churches, is that wasn't going to be about starting new faith communities that I myself would want to be a part of, because that would honestly get fairly boring and fairly bland pretty fast. I'm like, I mean, don't get me wrong, but that there were other people that had other gifts and passions who could speak to groups of people that I couldn't speak to. And so that part of the job was, and actually the biggest part of the job, was actually to help people create new communities of faith that they could speak to, that were relative to them, that may look not foolish to me necessarily, but definitely looked at something like that's good, that's important, but and you should go do that. And I want to lift up a few examples, some of which you guys have heard before. I think it was last summer, our youth group went and visited The Land, which is a project by Stephanie Price, who's pictured here. Stephanie Price is a great lady, real passion for things like land, agriculture, all that kind of stuff, and had this vision of like a faith community that was really centered around the idea of sustainably growing food. The conference happened to have this random 10-acre parcel. And so she and a group of people got together and started a dream. It was like, how could we build a place there where people could come together? They could garden. That's probably putting it a little simply, but where they could actually go and they could grow food and they could teach people about how you grow food as part of the ministry there. And that's what centered the ministry on. And it was immediately clear that she was passionate about this and that there were other people in her world and other people around who would be passionate about it. And I could vision in my head, you are going to be able to speak to people who have these kinds of concerns or who want to be involved in this kind of ministry, even though I think gardening is dumb and I don't want to do it. Right? And I'm like, now, I'm sorry, Dane, my love. I love your garden, and I'm happy to pick your tomatoes anytime. But it's definitely not my passion, right? But I could see that it was hers, and I could see other people would be involved in this, and that this would be an opportunity for those for us to reach people we wouldn't otherwise reach because the good news would be presented in a new way. And I got excited about that. And yes, there are people who will look at that and go, a church based on gardening, that seems foolish. But for the people who are there, for the people it's reaching, it's the good news. Another one is a good friend of mine, Jasper Peters. This is one of the first projects I worked on in a new church start down in Denver called Belong. Now, Jasper himself is African-American. He's in an interracial marriage. He's raising interracial children and knows all of the challenges that come along with that. And he had this dream to start a community of people who, understood or understood the challenges of living in a multiracial world and really, instead of wanting to hide from those challenges, really wanted to take them on straight on. And I'm like, great. And again, I could see his passion for it, and I could see his excitement for it, and the group of people that he had gathered who wanted to be a part of doing that. And I thought, great, that this is not something I could lead. Like this is not my life. This is not my experience. but I could see it as yours. And while some may look at starting a community that way as a little bit of foolishness, it is the good news for those who were there. And then finally, a couple that we all actually had the opportunity to meet last year, my friends Ryan and Tammy Canaday, who started a church called Free. And this is probably the most interesting example of this. Somewhere in Ryan's life, he's talked about many times, he talked about with us, he's talked about very openly. Ryan is an alcoholic in recovery. He's been in recovery for about 8 years now. And somewhere through that, he has progressed from being a person in recovery who was hiding that from the world to recognizing that because he was a person in recovery, it gave him the opportunity to reach people that others wouldn't reach. And because his wife was somebody who loved somebody who was in recovery, she had a ministry and an opportunity to reach people in a way that none of the rest of us could world. And so the idea, if you think about it on the face of it, if you're going to take this thing, that for no doubt for many of us would be one of the most hardest things about us, one of the hardest things to confess, something that if you're going to have shame or guilt in your life, that's something that permeates the process of addiction and addiction recovery is dealing with that shame and that guilt. So to take that thing that you're probably least proud of in the world and to center that as the center place for creating a new community of faith, a new place where the good news is going to be presented so that you can break down that stigma that many people who are in recovery face. To be able to put yourself out in the world like that. No doubt many people told Ryan and Tammy, that's foolish. Why would you put yourself out like that? But for the now hundreds of people they are reaching across multiple states with that ministry, it really looks like the good news. And that's the thing about it. The good news will look like foolishness to some and good news to others. The challenge is to figure out where you are. Where can you be the bearer of good news in a way that is real and relevant to those around you? Now, myself, I think in all those communities I just mentioned, I think those are all wonderful. I could not be the leader of those places because that's just not me. Right? I grew up in eastern Montana. Though myself, we did not grow up around, we didn't grow up on a farm, but we definitely grew up around people. The primary industry were agriculture and oil and gas. So agriculture and energy were what I grew up around. So that's what I know. Those are the people that I know. And at the same time, I also had a professional career, obviously before this. So I know what it is to sit in a cubicle. I know what it is to work for startups and to work for Fortune 500s. And I'm thinking, if only there was some mythical place. If only there was some mythical place whose history was steeped in agriculture and energy, but was burgeoning and growing with a growing group of professionals who were living in that place and maybe commuting to other places to sit in those professional spaces that I once sat in. Could such a place possibly exist that is grounded in this amazing work of growing things out of the land and yet finds itself in a place where we are now in community with people who work professionally in a bunch of different places? If only God would see fit to point me to such a place. Gosh knows what we could do together. So obviously, while as I've come to know you all over the last few years, I joke obviously, as I come to know you all over the last 4 years, it is somewhat amazing and I would argue somewhat providential how wonderful and how I have come to feel comfortable in this place, in this space. And even though I have never lived in Colorado before, I sometimes feel like I've lived in this part of my world my whole life because in a way that I have. And what we do here and how we do ministry here and how I approach things and the messages that I share may look like foolishness to some. I hope, despite the fact that I am in fact a religious leader, I hope it is good news for some of you. That is obviously my goal. Now, recently, I was actually talking with one of our folks in our church who is one of those professionals who lives here and then works elsewhere, back when working elsewhere was a thing. I mean, works from home now like everybody does, but eventually working elsewhere will be a thing. And I was talking with him, and he mentioned to me because I was curious about what he does, because his job is to do health and wellness programs for a large company. And large companies have this, right? Large companies want to invest in their workforces. They want their workforces healthy and happy, so they come to work and be productive, that sort of stuff. So his job is to coordinate health and wellness for his company. And one of the things he said in that conversation that surprised me, but then not really, was that there's been a big shift in that world the last several months. As we've all been going through the things that we've been going through, there's been a big shift that before COVID, before all the stuff we're dealing with now, the number one request that the health and wellness people would get would be for programs for, around things like weight loss and things like that. That was the number one request. Now, the number one request, by far and away, the most thing they're asked for most is mental health support. And once he said it, I went, of course that's what it is. Like, of course that's what we all need right now. Of course we all need a little, some support in that area. I mean, of course we're all struggling in that way. Like, we've watched the world get turned upside down around us. Our routines have all been disturbed. The things we used to love and take pleasure in, some of those things we can't do anymore, haven't been able to do for a while. I say this as a person sitting in an empty room, desperately waiting for the moment when it's safe to fill it back up again. Of course, people are struggling. I'm struggling. I would guess in some ways all of us and you are struggling right now with that. And so thank gosh there are people in the world like our parishioner who does this for a living. But the truth is, you don't have to do it for a living to help do this for one another. Because being part of the church, being part of this movement of Christ, being part of all of this whole project of being a faith community is to be fishers of men. It is to make disciples. And what that really means is it's to share good news. And is there ever a time when people probably needed some good news? And it's our job. It's our responsibility to find those whom we are relevant to, find those who are in our orbit, and ask ourselves, how can we be good news to them? And the good news may be praying for them. It may be offering praying for them. The good news may be inviting them to church. I personally think that's a good thing. I think people should invite people to church. And actually, it's really easy to invite people to church right now because all you got to do is send them a link, right? They can join from their pajamas, eat some pancakes. But it's not just that. And in fact, that's probably not the most important thing. One of the most important things I think we're going to do, what we're doing for each other right now, is making sure that we continue to reach out to those we know, for those around us, and just make sure they understand that they're seen. Make them understand that they're loved. Help them make sure they understand that we're thinking about them and that we care about them. Make sure that they understand that they are not alone. Because we are definitely living through a time when we can feel very alone. And that is not a feeling any of us enjoy. So let us be the good news for one another. Let us be the people that Christ called us to be. Let us go forth and be fruitful and multiply. Let us go and be fishers of men. Let us go, dare we say, risk being foolish. Risk looking foolish to the world in service to this message of God's love and grace that we have been given. Because we are called to love God, love neighbor, and love ourselves. Love God, love neighbor, and love ourselves. And if we do those things, and we want to do those things intentionally, we cannot help but share the good news with any that we encounter. So let us go. Let us go and be fishers of men. Amen.